Mommy Sophia? I'm sorry I couldn't say goodbye. The word struck Ethan like a physical blow. Mommy Sophia. The name echoed in his mind, ricocheting off every memory he had of his wife, every moment they had shared in their 15 years of marriage. Only family called her that. Only their nieces and nephews, only the children closest to her heart. But Ethan had no children. They had tried for years, endured the disappointment of failed treatments and dashed hopes, until Sophia had finally smiled through her tears and said they would find other ways to make a difference in the world. And they had, or so he thought. Now, standing frozen in the doorway of the grand funeral hall, watching a small homeless girl perched precariously on the edge of his wife's coffin, her bare feet swinging slightly as she wept, Ethan realized that Sophia had been making a difference in ways he had never imagined, touching lives he had never known existed, becoming a mother to children who desperately needed one. The billionaire's polished Italian leather shoes clicked softly against the marble floor as he moved forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. The funeral hall was magnificent in its somber elegance, thousands of white roses and lilies arranged in cascading displays, their perfume thick and cloying in the air, crystal chandeliers casting soft golden light over the assembled mourners who stood in respectful clusters throughout the vast space. Business associates in designer suits, society women in elegant black dresses and expensive jewelry, board members from Sophia's various charitable organizations. They filled the room with their whispered condolences and carefully composed expressions of grief. But none of them seemed to notice the small intruder, this ragged child who had somehow slipped past security to claim a spot on the very coffin itself, her thin body draped in clothes that hung like rags, her tangled dark hair falling forward to hide her face as she clutched a single wilted daisy in her trembling hands. Ethan's first instinct had been anger, a flash of protective indignation that someone would allow this disruption during his wife's funeral. But as he drew closer and heard those devastating words, Mommy Sophia, everything else fell away. The homeless girl sensed his approach and looked up with red-rimmed eyes, her face streaked with tears that had carved clean paths through the dirt on her cheeks. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with delicate features that spoke of Asian heritage and eyes that held depths of sorrow no child should ever carry. When she saw Ethan standing before her, she gasped and tried to scramble backward, nearly falling off the platform in her panic, her small hands slipping on the polished wood of the wife's coffin. "Please, mister, please don't be mad," she whispered, her voice hoarse and desperate. "I know I'm not supposed to be here. I know I don't belong with all these fancy people. But I had to come. I had to tell her goodbye. She was the only one who ever..." The girl's voice broke and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "She was the only one who ever made me feel like I mattered." Ethan knelt down slowly, bringing himself to eye level with the child, his expensive suit creasing as his knees touched the cold marble. Up close, he could see the full extent of her condition, the way her collarbones jutted out sharply beneath her threadbare shirt, the bruises and scrapes that covered her bare feet and legs, the hollow look in her eyes that came from too many nights without proper sleep or adequate food. This wasn't just a poor child. This was a homeless girl, an orphan surviving on the streets, and somehow she had known his wife well enough to call her Mommy. The emotional story unfolding before him was rewriting everything Ethan thought he understood about Sophia's life, about the woman he had loved and lived beside for 15 years. "I'm not mad," Ethan said gently, though his voice trembled with a mixture of confusion and overwhelming emotion. "I just want to understand. How did you know my wife? How did you know Sophia?" The girl studied his face carefully as if trying to determine whether he could be trusted, whether this billionaire in his $1,000 suit would understand the world she came from. Finally, she seemed to make a decision, and she sank back down onto the edge of the coffin, her small body relaxing slightly as she began to speak in a rush of words that tumbled over each other in their urgency to be heard. "My name is May," she said quietly. "I lived at Sunshine Haven Orphanage until 4 months ago. Mommy Sophia came to visit us every single Thursday for as long as I can remember. She wasn't like the other volunteers who would show up once or twice and then disappear. She came every week no matter what. She would arrive in the afternoon with bags full of books and art supplies and homemade cookies that smelled like heaven. She knew all our names. All 43 of us. She remembered our birthdays and our favorite colors and our dreams for the future." May's voice grew stronger as she spoke, animated by the precious memories that seemed to be her most valuable possession. She would sit with us and read stories in different voices, making us laugh even when we felt like crying. She taught us to paint and draw, telling us that every child deserves to create beauty in the world. She braided our hair and told us we were beautiful and worthy and loved, even when we didn't believe it ourselves. The orphan paused, her fingers tightening around the wilted daisy she still held, and Ethan noticed that despite its faded petals and bent stem, she was treating it like a precious treasure. Mommy Sophia gave me this flower 3 weeks ago, May continued, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. It was the last time I saw her. She said daisies were symbols of innocence and new beginnings, and she wanted me to remember that no matter what happened, I always had the power to start over, to bloom again. I've kept it with me every day since then, even though it's dying now, just like she. The girl couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't speak the terrible truth that had brought her to this funeral hall. Ethan felt his throat constrict, emotion threatening to overwhelm him completely. Thursday afternoons. Every Thursday for years, Sophia had told him she was attending book club meetings or having lunch with friends or running errands. He had never questioned it, never doubted her, because in their marriage there had been trust and respect and space for individual pursuits. But now this heartbreaking revelation crashed over him. His wife had been living a secret life of service, pouring herself into these orphan children, becoming the mother figure they desperately needed, and she had never told him. Why had she kept it hidden? Had she thought he wouldn't understand? Wouldn't approve? The thought pierced him with regret. May, Ethan said carefully, his mind racing to piece together this puzzle. You said you lived at the orphanage until 4 months ago. Where are you living now? The homeless girl looked down at her dirty bare feet, shame coloring her features. Sunshine Haven closed 3 months ago, she said, her voice hollow. The directors called us all together one morning and told us they didn't have enough money to keep operating, that their biggest donor had stopped contributing and they couldn't pay the bills anymore. They said they were sorry, that they tried everything, but we all had to leave. Some kids got placed with foster families. Some went to other group homes. But I... She swallowed hard, her small throat working around the lump of fear and sorrow lodged there. I got sent to a place where there were too many kids and not enough adults who cared. The people running it weren't mean exactly, but they weren't kind either. We were just numbers to them, just mouths to feed and bodies to house. Nobody knew my name. Nobody asked about my dreams. Nobody braided my hair or told me I mattered. May's voice grew smaller, more fragile, and Ethan had to lean closer to hear her. So I ran away. I thought maybe if I could find Mommy Sophia, she would help me. She always said if we ever needed anything, if we were ever scared or in trouble, we should find her. But when I went back to the orphanage, it was all boarded up and nobody would tell me where she was. I've been sleeping in the park, in this little alcove behind some bushes where the security guards don't usually look. I eat whatever I can find. Sometimes people throw away perfectly good food, and sometimes kind strangers give me money or a sandwich. I try to stay clean by washing in public restrooms, and I try to be brave like Mommy Sophia taught me to be. Tears were streaming down her face again now, and her whole body shook with the force of her grief. But then yesterday I heard some people talking, and they mentioned that there was going to be a funeral for Sophia Wallace today, and I knew that was her. I knew it was my Mommy Sophia, and I realized why she hadn't come to find me, why she hadn't saved me. She couldn't, because she was gone. The life-changing moment had arrived, though Ethan didn't fully comprehend it yet. He only knew that his heart was breaking and expanding simultaneously, cracking open to accommodate a truth so profound and painful that it threatened to reshape his entire understanding of love and responsibility. His wife, his beautiful, elegant, seemingly perfect wife, had been supporting an orphanage, had been funding it entirely, and when she died suddenly from the brain aneurysm that took her without warning or time for goodbyes, the money had stopped and the organization had collapsed. 43 children had been scattered like seeds in the wind, and this precious girl named May had ended up homeless and desperate, sleeping in parks and scrounging for food, trying to be brave while her world fell apart. Sophia never told me, Ethan said, his voice rough with unshed tears. She never told me about any of you. I had no idea she was doing this. May looked up at him with something like understanding in her young eyes. She said you were very busy, that you worked so hard to build companies and create jobs and help people in big ways. She said you were a good man with a good heart, but that you lived in a different world from us, a world of boardrooms and business deals. She didn't want to bother you with our small problems when you were trying to solve big ones. The orphan reached out tentatively and touched Ethan's hand where it rested on his knee. But she talked about you all the time. She loved you so much. She said you made her laugh and challenged her to think and supported all her dreams, even the ones you didn't know about. She said loving you was the best decision she ever made. The billionaire couldn't hold back his tears anymore. They fell freely down his face and he didn't bother to wipe them away. Around them, the funeral hall had grown quieter as more and more mourners noticed the extraordinary scene unfolding. The wealthy businessman kneeling before a homeless girl, both of them crying beside the wife's coffin that held the woman who had connected them across the vast divide of privilege and poverty. Ethan was dimly aware that people were staring, that whispers were spreading through the crowd like ripples on water, but he didn't care about appearances or propriety anymore. All that mattered was the truth blazing in his heart, burning away years of comfortable blindness. "May," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the tears, "I want you to come home with me. Today. Right now. I don't want you spending another night in that park or another day wondering where your next meal will come from. Sophia loved you and that makes you family. Will you let me take care of you the way she did?" The homeless girl stared at him in disbelief, her mouth falling open in shock. You want me? But I'm nobody. I don't have parents or money or anything to give you. I'm just a street kid now, just an orphan that nobody wanted." "You're wrong," Ethan said fiercely, taking both her small hands in his. "You're not nobody. You're somebody that Sophia loved enough to spend every Thursday with for years. You're somebody brave enough to walk across a city to say goodbye to the person who mattered most to you. You're somebody who kept a wilted flower safe for 3 weeks because it represented hope and new beginnings. That's not nobody, May. That's somebody extraordinary." The emotional story pouring out of him now came from a place deeper than logic or reason. It came from the heart, from the part of him that Sophia had always believed in even when he couldn't see it himself. May threw herself into Ethan's arms, sobbing with a mixture of relief and joy and grief so intense that her whole body shook. The billionaire held her tightly, feeling how fragile she was, how much she needed protection and care and love, and he made a silent vow to his wife's memory that he would not fail this child, would not fail any of the children Sophia had loved. As he held May, his mind was already racing ahead, making plans. He would reopen Sunshine Haven with an endowment large enough to sustain it permanently. He would locate every single child who had been displaced when it closed and make sure they were safe and cared for. He would hire the best staff, create the best programs, build something that would honor Sophia's secret legacy and ensure it continued long after both of them were gone. But more than that, he would become a father. This heartbreaking orphan crying in his arms would become his daughter, and he would learn what Sophia had always understood, that the measure of a life wasn't in the wealth accumulated or the deals closed, but in the hearts touched and the love shared. The life-changing moment had transformed him already, had taken the billionaire who wrote checks from a distance and turned him into a man willing to get his hands dirty, willing to learn names and remember birthdays and braid hair and read stories in funny voices. As the funeral service began and the priest's solemn voice filled the hall, Ethan sat in the front row with May beside him, her hand clutched tightly in his. She had stopped crying now, her tear-stained face peaceful for the first time since he'd found her on the wife's coffin. The mourners who had been scandalized by her presence began to soften as they watched the tender way Ethan cared for her, offering her tissues, speaking to her in gentle whispers, keeping her close. By the end of the service, when Ethan stood to deliver a eulogy, he deviated completely from the prepared remarks his assistant had written. "My wife Sophia," he began, his voice carrying through the hall, "was a woman of many secrets. She was elegant and graceful in public, the perfect partner for a man building a business empire. But she was so much more than that, and I'm ashamed to say I didn't fully appreciate the depth of her compassion until today." Ethan looked down at May and then back at the assembled crowd. Sophia spent every Thursday for years visiting an orphanage, loving children who had no parents, making them feel valued and seen and cherished. She funded the entire operation out of her own accounts, never telling me, never seeking recognition or praise. When she died, the orphanage closed and dozens of children lost their champion. This young lady beside me, May, is one of those children. She walked across the city today, barefoot and hungry, to say goodbye to the woman she called Mommy Sophia. That's the kind of love my wife inspired, deep, genuine, life-changing love. The billionaire's voice grew stronger, more passionate. I've spent my career building companies and creating value for shareholders. But Sophia understood something I'm only now beginning to grasp, that the most valuable thing any of us can create is love, is connection, is the sense in another human being that they matter. Going forward, I'm going to honor her legacy by reopening Sunshine Haven and supporting every child she loved. And I'm going to honor her memory by adopting May and giving her the home and family she deserves. That's what Sophia would have wanted. That's the man she always believed I could become. The emotional story of that day would spread far beyond the funeral hall. News outlets would pick it up, social media would explode with commentary, and the heartbreaking image of a billionaire embracing a homeless girl beside his wife's coffin would become iconic, a symbol of grief transformed into purpose, of privilege learning to see beyond itself. But for Ethan and May, the real story was just beginning. In the weeks and months that followed, they would navigate the awkward territory of becoming a family, the wealthy businessman learning to parent and the traumatized orphan learning to trust again. There would be difficult moments, tears and frustrations and growing pains, but there would also be laughter and joy and the slow healing that comes from being truly loved. Ethan kept his promises. Sunshine Haven reopened within 3 months, fully funded with an endowment that would keep it operating for generations. He personally met with every child who had been displaced, ensuring they were safe and supported, offering resources and opportunities to those who needed them. He hired staff who actually cared, who knew the children's names and dreams, who carried on Sophia's tradition of Thursday afternoon visits with books and cookies and kindness. And every Thursday, without fail, Ethan and May would go to the orphanage together, reading stories and playing games and making sure every child there knew they were valued and loved. May blossomed in her new life. The hollow-eyed homeless girl gradually transformed into a healthy, confident young person. She had her own room in Ethan's mansion, decorated with art supplies and books, and the wilted daisy pressed carefully under glass as a reminder of where she'd come from. She attended an excellent school, made friends, discovered a passion for music and mathematics, and slowly learned to trust that this good thing wouldn't be taken away from her. And Ethan discovered that being a father was more rewarding than any business success he'd ever achieved, that coming home to May's excited chatter about her day was worth more than any board meeting or deal closing. On the first anniversary of Sophia's death, Ethan and May visited her grave together. May brought fresh daisies, a whole bouquet of them, and placed them gently on the headstone. "Thank you, Mommy Sophia," she whispered. "Thank you for loving me when I thought nobody could. Thank you for bringing me to Daddy Ethan. Thank you for teaching me that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up for you, who sees you, who refuses to give up on you." Ethan wrapped his arm around May's shoulders, pulling her close. "She'd be so proud of you," he said softly. "And she'd be proud of us, of the family we've become." As they stood together in the quiet cemetery, surrounded by the evidence of love that transcends death, Ethan thought about that life-changing moment when he'd found a homeless girl sitting on his wife's coffin, calling her Mommy Sophia. That single moment had cracked open his comfortable world and forced him to see beyond the boardrooms and business deals, to recognize that the most important work any of us can do is the work of loving each other, of showing up consistently for those who need us, of being willing to be changed by the people we choose to care for. Sophia had understood that truth all along, and now, finally, so did he. The emotional story that began with heartbreak had become a story of hope, proving that even in our deepest grief, we can find purpose, that even when we lose someone irreplaceable, their love can continue to ripple outward through the lives they touched and the legacy they left behind. If this story moved your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Have you ever experienced a moment that completely changed your perspective on what matters most in life? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experiences inspire me and this whole community. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss our next emotional, life-changing story. Together, we're building a community that believes in the transformative power of love and compassion. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.